everybody, and welcome to RISEUP Voices from the Frontlines. I am Krista Fee, and I am your host. And tonight, I'm bringing a very special guest to you. I know most of you guys know this is our very first episode of 2025, and many of you probably know, and more than that, don't know, that January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month. So this month, I'm actually going to be bringing you guests who are going to tell you stories of their experience working on the front lines in some way, shape, or form in the fight against human trafficking. So today I have a really special guest for you who has really dedicated an entire lifetime to this fight. So please welcome Heidi Chance, an internationally recognized keynote speaker, sex trafficking trainer, author, and a retired detective.
Hi.
Hi. So we're going to have lots of dog activity today. I stick mine in the kennel, and I didn't actually do that this time. So, hey, no. Because they were sleeping, I thought I was going to get away with it.
Oh.
So, you have so many different stories to tell. Let's start where most people don't probably start. Tell us a little bit about who you were as a child and if this is where you saw yourself going.
Yeah, so I grew up in the Phoenix area, and I have a sister and a brother, and my sister is, she's a little bit older than me. She's actually adopted, so we're the same age for 2 months. And then she turned 40 before I did, so that's all I can say about her. But she and I were at the same school, and she was a track star. And I don't know what it is. Maybe I'm highly competitive, but I'm not in track. But as far as, people knowing who I am, and then I was kind of feeling in high school that I was in her shadow, I guess. So I ended up finding out about junior ROTC at a different high school. And I really, thought I was going to go in the military, really, in the Air Force. So I actually switched high schools. My junior and senior year, I went to a different school and joined the ROTC program and thought when I turn, 18, I'm going to go off to the Air Force and then maybe be a police officer. Because I did always want to be a police officer. I just thought I needed to fill the time between turning 21 and high school. So that's what my plan was. And then and this is going to date me so people can do the math, but in 1996, when I graduated, my dad, right before I graduated, told me about a new program that Phoenix Police Department was doing called the Cadet Trainee Program. And they were hiring civilian, kids, basically 18, and having them work in a capacity as a cadet. And so I applied for that program and I got it. I actually went down, tested thousands of other people taking the same written exam, the same physical fitness exam, all the same hiring process as a full-fledged police officer. And I actually got hired, and I was actually the first female ever of that program. They had the program many, many years ago, and it was always men, and they opened it up again, and I applied and got it. So I had badge number 2, and I went on after that program to the police academy. So I actually turned 21 in the police academy.
So you have been in law enforcement in some capacity always?
For a long time, yeah. Pretty much. Yes.
That's like your whole dossier is something to do with. That's awesome. Most people transition somewhere in the middle of their life and then come back to it. I love that you knew what you wanted and you just went for it. Yeah. I get that feeling that you just kind of always go for what you want.
I do. I definitely do.
So you're now a speaker and you have books and you do a lot of training and stuff. So you're trying to help people beyond just doing the work that is helping people. Now you've shifted gears to teaching others how to help people. Is Do you find that it was more emotionally challenging to be out in the street doing the work, or back here talking to people about doing the work? Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense. Definitely different challenges, I think, to both. As far as doing the work, obviously being in the moment of being a female undercover, working, these operations and targeting sex buyers and traffickers, both of which could have weapons, both of which could have an ulterior motive other than, what we're believing that they are there for. Because we have had sex buyers that have committed homicides, same as traffickers. So it's very dangerous for sure. But then the same thing goes with being an instructor, especially with law enforcement. They're a tough crowd. A lot of them look at you like this girl doesn't know what she's talking about until I open my mouth, and then I get a different response. But certainly I've had experiences where people had a certain impression of me, and then when they heard me present, they had a different impression. So that's good to hear and always positive. And when they come up at the end of the instruction and the training and they have questions, or they tell me, hey, what you said was something I've never heard before, or actually the highest compliment I ever got was a guy that said, you know what you're fucking talking about. That's what he said to me. And I'm like, thanks. So he just came up to tell me that. So that was pretty awesome. But it is challenging because what I'm instructing on is how to do these undercover operations. And a lot of female officers don't want to be in that capacity. They have spouses that won't let them, or that have a problem with it. They have no desire to, be in these sticky, dangerous situations, because I've had, situations where suspects have tried to touch me inappropriately, grab a hold of me, those kind of things. And it's, a dangerous situation to be in. So I totally understand. And then, as far as some of the other things I train on, interviewing these victims is very difficult. They're not your typical victim that, first of all, that would come forward. Usually it's, we've found you and now we're asking you about what's been going on, and they're not really forthcoming with that information right away. And they also are very difficult in the whole aftermath, when you're trying to get them to come to court and face their trafficker and testify against them and all those things. So instructing on all of that process, instructing on putting these cases together for successful prosecution. I'm sure we'll talk more about this later, but these cases are really hard to prove. A lot of times we have to look for other evidence because we don't have a witness that saw this person, go have sex with somebody, a buyer, make money, and then turn that money over to their trafficker. And so we have to look for corroborative evidence and other things. And then I have new class that I just developed that I'm talking more to officers about, because I feel, and I'm just one detective in one part of the world, but I myself have had 4 traffickers that I have come in contact with again, that I had put in jail or prison. And here we are several years later meeting again, and they're trafficking another kid, or they're trafficking other adult victims. And it's because right now we're just so busy. We do the victim interview, we dump the phone, we get some evidence from the hotels, maybe some video surveillance, we do some subpoenas, and we send off the case. We aren't doing what I'm trying to teach now, is to go after these traffickers financially, because that is going to really take them out at the knees. And when they come out, they won't have all these hidden assets anymore, because we took it. And they won't want to experience that again, hopefully, because obviously spending 20 years in prison isn't working, because they're coming back out. And so it's one of those where we've got to do more, and it's a lot of work. And inspiring, here's the challenge, inspiring those detectives to do all the financial investigation side of it is a little bit difficult, but I feel it's necessary. And when I present on this, I share a case study showing them how it works, showing them how to identify the illegal proceeds, how to write the seizure warrant, how to do the things. So then that way they're inspired to, especially with the outcome. I have this one trafficker with one victim that he was sentenced to 108 years. That's an incredible, outcome to speak
really
on and inspire them to see that what's possible. So lots of challenges.
It is a challenge to get, like, we see a lot of really short sentences, and we see a lot of people that get out really easily, and a lot of frustration around that. I keep catch and release. People are always talking about that. So there is billions of dollars in trafficking. So they're going to go right back to that because it's what they know and it's easy. And like you said, the network wasn't broken. You got one piece in a wheel and there's tons of other pieces in that wheel. And if you don't root out the cause and get all the different pieces, then you're not really making that much headway. Was that a frustration for you?
Yeah. So I think part of that wheel that you're talking about too, and this is a thing that I've experienced since I've been doing this for many years, 16 plus, is there's a lot of dynamics in the family of the trafficker that we need to look more at. For example, I've had traffickers' mothers that I've had to do a case on for interfering, intimidating witnesses, destroying evidence. And then the other dynamic I've noticed, just like the car dealership guy wants to leave the whole car dealership business to his kids to take on the role of the car dealership, traffickers, a lot of them, most of the ones that I've had experience with, have a person in their family that it's a learned behavior that was a trafficker also in the past or current. Stepdad, boyfriend of the mom, cousin, uncle, brother, dad. It seems to be a generational thing happening here where these traffickers just take on that role that's passed down to them from the other generation. So that's definitely a dynamic I've noticed.
I know most of my audience has heard a lot of talk about what is human trafficking, but not so much the differentiation between what is human trafficking and then the sex trafficking element of that. So let's back up a little bit and just what is sex trafficking and what are a few different ways that can look like?
Okay, hold on 1 second. I'm gonna wait till they stop barking. Okay, so your question was, what is sex trafficking? Just a better description of what that is?
Yep.
Okay. So for me, I live and die by definitions, right, as a law enforcement officer. So the definition of human trafficking itself has two crimes actually underneath it, and that's where people get it confused with smuggling. And just to back that up, human smuggling is actually a crime against the border or the state that involves an element of consent, and it involves transportation from point A to point B. Someone who's smuggled, however, if they are a victim of human trafficking, which could be forced labor or forced sex along that transportation, they could be a victim of those things, then they would be a victim of human trafficking. But those are two separate crimes. Now, as far as forced labor and forced sex, both of those require us, law enforcement, to investigate the elements of force, fraud, or coercion. And so force is pretty self-explanatory. That's going to be some kind of violent incident, some kind of injury, scars, bruises, cuts, all of those things. And then the fraud and the coercion are a little bit harder to explain, and even for a victim to realize that that's happening to them. So the fraud is, a lot of times these traffickers are very skilled at manipulation, and they constantly are telling victims all of these false promises. I'm going to get you an apartment. I'm going to get you a car. You want to go to beauty school? We'll get you to beauty school. These are all like dangling the little carrot of all these things that never actually really happen. And that's part of the fraud. And then the coercion, and this is, a phrase that I should what is the trademark? Because I say it all the time and it is my phrase. A pimp is the most reliable person you'll ever meet. If they say they're going to beat your ass, they're going to beat your ass. They have to have their victims know that what they are telling them will happen. Otherwise, these victims won't believe them when they threaten. And so the fact that they are doing the action to let them know and see every now and again these threats coming to fruition, they believe when a pimp says this, something's going to happen. So they don't want that to happen, and they believe those threats. And that is part of the coercion of why these victims stay in the situation they're in. And for me, it's very important to talk about those definitions and further explain what I mean by, or what the definition means by, fraud and coercion, so that a jury can understand when we're speaking in these words, in these terms, what that means. Because for me, testifying as an investigator, and I'm testifying that this person who I'm calling a victim, I need the jury to see them as a victim. And I'm describing that they're walking freely down the road with a phone in their hand. I still need the jury to see them as a victim. That phone is there, but they're not able to use it in the way that a normal person would think, to call for help or to call the police. That is not what that phone is for, because it's been ingrained in them that if you do that, this is going to happen. And the threats that something's going to happen to a family member. And so when I'm testifying, I try to, obviously speak to the facts, but in trials that I've participated in as an expert witness, I really go into those things so that the jury can understand, okay, she was not free to leave and she is a victim. And this is why. Because these things that Detective Chance talked about are part of this case and part of this incident. And so it's very, very important to me to have an informed jury and an informed community, which is your audience. So I'm glad to be here telling them the truth about this.
Right. And we're talking about girls on street corners, but we're also talking about girls in massage parlors. Mm-hmm. And we're talking about boys as well. And we're talking about teenagers that are still living at home whose parents don't even know that this is happening. So it doesn't always look the way that people assume that it looks. And I know it's really hard for the community to empathize when they're driving down the road and they see, the streetwalker, and they don't really realize that that person may or may not be there by choice. And so what would you say to people just in general, the community that has no experience in recognizing how do you tell the difference between someone who is completely out there willingly and someone who isn't?
Yeah, so a couple of things I want to unpack from all of that. One of the most common questions I get when I go present to community groups and organizations out there is, what does a victim look like? So people still think that this has to equal that. And, I break it down for them by talking about the case that took 5 years of my life to investigate, and it was a 7-month-long trial. And this case had 7 victims, 2 juveniles. It's familial trafficking, and it involved several individuals from different lifestyles, different paths. For example, one of the adult females, she was in her 40s, working as a Department of Corrections officer at the prison, lost her job, became a stripper at the strip club and met the brothel owner, who introduced her into the life of prostitution in her 40s. Same case, one of the other adult females, barely an adult, 19 years old. She was up north in Northern Arizona University. Her mom is a nurse. She has no family history of any violence, any assault, any child abuse, anything. She meets a guy on Craigslist who wants to take modeling pictures of her, and that guy introduces her to the brothel owner, and now her entire life was going one direction, and now she's a resident of the female prison here because of a drug addiction she got. So it is not just the kids at all. It's not just people who are in the poor areas of town. It isn't just people who are a victim of something in their past. It isn't just the kids in child welfare. It is and could be anyone at any time. And yes, there are definitely boys and men that are victims of sex trafficking as well. I just use that example, that case, to talk about that. Now, as far as the follow-up to your other part of the question, as far as the community looking for or seeing signs of, when they are driving down the side of the road and they want to do something to help, speaking on how to report and how to recognize the indicators of possible sex trafficking victims is also what I like to talk about. And I have created a resource actually on my website where I have a list of these indicators. I'm just going to talk about a couple. So let's say you're at the gas station and you're in line and you have 3 people in front of you and they all are dressed provocatively and they all have the same or similar tattoos. That would probably be a Yahtzee or a bingo or a blackjack or whatever your game of choice is. You won. Winner, winner, chicken dinner. That's probably a high probability that those individuals might be in the sex trafficking as victims in sex trafficking. So basically, what do you do with that information? Some states like Arizona, we have our own hotline. There is the National Human Trafficking Hotline. The other thing to do is especially if you're making an observation of these 3 individuals and one looks like they're under 18, that would be a 911 call. And you don't have to have the police show up to your house. You can leave your information. Please leave your contact information on the phone, on the call, if you end up hanging up with the dispatcher, because we need to call you back. You may have seen something else that we need to know. But make the call. You can ask to be contacted by law enforcement over the phone. Again, they don't have to show up to your house. They don't have to show up to the gas station. If you want to hang out and give further follow-up and updates of where these people go, but just be a good witness. We're going to need to know, about how tall they are, how much they weigh, what does their clothing look like, how old do you think they are, what race are they, do they come in a vehicle? We're going to need to know a license plate, a make, model, color, last known direction of travel, those kind of things. That is what we need for you to be doing to help with this whole problem. And it's a simple thing to do. Just make a phone call and report what you're seeing. As far as other indicators, the list that I have will have, multiple cell phones, expensive items all of a sudden being given to someone. Not to be judgy, but we've all been alive long enough to know that no one gives you anything for free without expecting something in return, unfortunately. And so if someone's giving people gifts, or even if it's, especially if it's a kid getting gifts, what is this gift for, and why is this child being rewarded with gifts from a stranger? Lots of questions need to be asked about that. It could be, a child predator, not even a trafficking situation. So lots of things for the public to know about. I have that list on my website at chancefororawareness.com. So it's chancefororawareness.com. And it's basically, a really good resource for the public to, know what they're looking at so they can report and help.
We will put that website down below so that you don't lose it. It will be a direct link so you can get with Heidi really easily. You can get that information, and we'll also link her on the website as additional resources if you want more information. And you are doing some trainings that are for the public as well. Is that true?
Oh yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I do a human trafficking 101 type of training. And it's basically similar to probably training that's out there. However, I, again, bring in the case studies and I talk about the evolution of law enforcement that I have witnessed, how we respond to this problem, because I was there in 2005 when we were just arresting prostitutes. I was there trying to get on that squad, the human trafficking unit, and they only allowed one position on each squad for a female. The rest were male because they needed male undercovers to arrest prostitutes. And so we have evolved and recognized, hey, those are actually more than likely victims. Let's target the real bad guy, the sex buyers and the traffickers. And now those squads have more women on them than they do men, because you need female undercovers to, fight this and target these suspects. So I teach a case study comparison, and I talk about this evolution of our response to this problem, how we're asking the question we were never asking before, which is, what can we actually do to help you get out of this instead of just arresting these victims? And I talked through a case study comparison too, where I have a case that was a kid that was 14 who met a trafficker online on social media platform, and he convinced her to run away. And he only got 20 years, a plea offer for 20 years. Fast forward to the case I talked about with the 7 victims, the 5-year-long case. I didn't tell you this yet, but that case ended with him being found guilty on 101 out of 105 counts, and he was sentenced to 493.5 years in prison, which is a record for the United States. So people love to hear, the good news, at least, with this issue.
Right, that we're actually making some progress.
Yeah, and that only happens with an informed jury.
So let's talk a little bit about the work. I don't think anyone probably knows what it's like to go undercover in that kind of role. Do you have a story that's your favorite event that happened, or something that was really scary, or just like share that experience a little bit?
Yeah. Well, since let's see here, sometimes instead of working just the streets, we would post advertisements consistent with the ads that you would see online now. And I'm saying this in the past, but I'm still working undercover now, but for a different law enforcement agency. But these ads, the sex buyers contact you, and we get the hotel, and without giving away law enforcement secrets and tactics, they come to the hotel. And I did have one where I made a mistake, and I talk about this when I teach a female undercover school. I made the mistake of getting too comfortable with the situation, with, my job at that point, and I laid down on the bed and was chatting with him, and he was standing over me. And as I'm conversing with him, talking about the elements of the crime, he ended up dropping his pants and jumping on me butt naked. So I don't even know how fast I got off that bed and out from under him, but I was able to get away from him, and the arrest team came in. But that is a dangerous situation, and I let my guard down, and I became too comfortable. And it's a lesson in that with the undercover aspect of this, and then talking about, and I always talk about things that went wrong and mistakes that we've had happen, so that other agencies won't have those problems. They won't make those mistakes.
Do you get to carry your weapons with you, and you feel at least relatively capable of defending yourself in those situations, or are you very vulnerable and generally at your teams you have to depend on your team 100%?
It just depends. It's one of those things where it depends on, Arizona is 120 degrees sometimes, and I'm going to wear shorts and a tank top. There's not really a place to put that. But we train for these types of operations in the way that it would be a rescue. In some point, we've trained together all the time. So in that way, I can feel confident that I just need to get out of the way and they'll handle it. But yes, it just depends, and we definitely train.
Your team is really important. So how do I want to ask this?
Yeah.
The dynamic in law enforcement, there's a lot of ideas that women are still struggling to find their place in law enforcement. And I've done a lot of interviews with women who took a long time to find their place and had to really push for that respect and that acceptance and that equality. In something as sensitive as what you're doing, what was your experience getting a team that you felt safe and comfortable with, and that you felt respected you?
I think it's both ways. Like you have to have a reputation coming into a specialty detail before you ever even get there, that you are a good investigator, that you are, of solid mind and can handle those type of things. And I think you have to have that before you even get there. And I think they're looking for that when they test and have the testing process and choose who they want to come in. And, you know, when I speak to younger female officers, I am very much trying to tell them, be careful what you post online, because, you know, if you've got a special account that you think no one will find, a defense attorney could find that. They're going to look, they're going to have a private investigator look, because they want to make you look bad. And if you've got pictures on there of you in your uniform and then you in a bikini or you in a thong on a bed with your butt up in the air, they're going to show that to the jury. They're going to try to make something out of your personal social media to show the jury that you were asking for it, or you were exploiting their client, or the word is it extortion? Not extortion. Entrapping. Yes, you were entrapping their client, and then they're going to show that. Whether that's like related to the case or anything, doesn't matter. If the jury sees it and they have this impression of you that's been created by the defense, and they will, it's gonna mess up your case. And if I have younger female officers wanting to shadow us and come to our unit, I talk to them about that. I tell them to take that shit down. Don't post it. Don't have it out there, because you don't want your reputation, even with judges and juries and prosecutors, to be affected by what you post. It's also inappropriate. Just saying.
So integrity, and this is a lifestyle. Being an investigator,
it's one of those where if you're going to be an undercover, you're kind of held to an even higher standard, because literally you're going to have defense attorney ask you if you have ever lied. And of course you've lied, because I'm lying about who I am. That's what an undercover is. Don't get tripped up on that. You just tell the truth. Of course, my real name is not this name. I lied about that to this suspect because I'm an undercover, and that's what an undercover is. So it's one of those where you're definitely held to a higher standard, and you need to think about that earlier in your career if you want to move to a unit like that.
So how long did it take you to find where you wanted to be in law enforcement? When you first started working, what were you doing?
So I was in patrol, and then about 3 years in, I started a family. And so I got pregnant with my son. And so I went to school resource officer for a little while. I thought was going to be a little while, because I knew that I wanted to breastfeed. And there is no pulling into a Circle K gas station in full uniform, putting my gun belt on a dirty floor and pumping. It's just not possible. And so I decided to, and I don't think people realize that female officers with children really have a challenge to, number one, make choices to get off the street. Number two, grow that belly and yourself in front of, everyone every day at work if you're put on the desk. Lose contact with your squad. And then think about the aftermath of a newborn baby and still working full time and overtime and go in and responding to calls of bomb threats on houses and all kinds of things. So it's a lot to think about as a woman, as a female officer, to have a family. But what I did is I decided to go to school resource officer, and I stayed there. I blinked and six years went by. And what it was for me is I went into the police station one day, and you don't get to take the patrol car home. So I had to turn the keys in, and I put the keys in the box, and I walked down the hallway past to the exit. And right there are 2 rooms that we have for juveniles who we're either interviewing or who are in trouble. And I happened to double take when I looked by and saw this girl in there that I remember when she was a student at the middle school that I was working at. And that was only a year or 2 prior. And here she is, still a juvenile on that day. And I peeked my head in and I asked her, well, why are you in trouble? And she recognized me. And she told me she was under arrest for prostitution. And this was, when we were arresting anyone. This was back in like 2005, 2004. And I was just, jaw drop, like, what do you mean? Because I didn't realize, even though I had been a police officer for many years, that youth get involved in prostitution. And so that was kind of my moment of, wow. And then an opportunity came about where I was able to shadow the Vice unit. It was called Vice back then, the unit I ended up going to, that they changed the name to the Human Exploitation and Trafficking Unit. And, I started shadowing with them, and I really saw that I could make a better impact doing that. And so that's where my career path shifted, and I spent almost 14 years in that unit.
So what do you say your passion and your purpose, like what drives you?
I think some of the successes I've had, being able to talk about an almost 500-year sentence is very inspiring. And it's inspiring to me to share my expertise to the public as well as to law enforcement. I'm just really passionate about what I do. I've had a great career, and I just want to pass that torch on to other female officers to have a similar career, because it really can be an amazing job.
So is there anything else that you want to tell the community?
Yeah. So I think what I also wanted to talk about with you was the fact that there's some myths about how this happens. There's the myth, kind of like the movies, Taken and Taken 1 and 2 and the other movies out there, that there's an abduction always. And if it's an abduction, that equals human trafficking. It's not always that way. Not to say it never happens that way, but it isn't as often as you would think. It actually happens with your phone. That is what happens. That is where traffickers are seeking out victims. And I know this because as an undercover, I have 7 Facebooks, 4 Instagrams. These are outside of my personal. Tagged, Meet Me, Bumble, Plenty of Fish, Snapchat, X. I just opened up a Discord, all in undercover personas. And I have been recruited and groomed by traffickers and arrested them, extradited them from other states even. And I've done warrants for our conversation, obviously, for my case. And I found that the message they sent me, they sent to hundreds of other profiles all over the United States, all female, looking for the next victim. And that message has to get out there to parents that you need to talk to your kids about these threats that they're facing online, on the social media apps and on the games and the internet in general. That is where these traffickers are recruiting and grooming, because they can sit on their butt. They don't have a job. This is all they do all day long, is manage the victims they have right now and get new ones. And they can sit on the couch and just copy and paste, send that message to your kid. And if you don't talk to them about this happening, and they can't recognize it when it happens and then tell you about it, they're going to be susceptible. And preventing this is so important. That's why I wrote my book. That's why I do a lot of my community awareness. Is the national average age of entry into sex trafficking was 15 when I first started investigating this crime. Right now it's 13. And in my recent experience with some of the juveniles we've rescued, it is inching closer to 12, 11 years old, which means these parents need to have this conversation earlier than you would think. I'm talking 8, 9, 10. Yeah. And I'm constantly telling them this. And I actually had a guy, I wish I had it on recording. He raised his hand and he said, well, how do we have this conversation, Detective Chance? And then I had this epiphany moment. I'm like, okay, I'm going to write a book on how. And so I've written my book, Talk to Them. And that is the how-to guide to have these difficult conversations, not just about sex trafficking, but sextortion, luring a minor for sex, child predators, all of the dangers that they're facing. Because my hope is that these kids who are on these platforms, and it may be a situation where the parent doesn't know they have a secret Instagram account, and someone slips into their messages and starts telling them, hey, keep this conversation a secret, or let's delete what we just talked about, or speaking in some kind of emoji code, that they'll recognize that happening and they'll tell their parents about it, or they'll just continue engaging with this person in the first place. So that's a nutshell of why I'm so inspired to do what I'm doing.
Can parents keep the conversation going and turn that into the police department?
So that's a chapter in my book, but I'll go ahead and spoil it for you because they need to know this. The whole entrapment word, that, and then rules of evidence. And there's a reason why it has to be a peace officer engaging with this suspect. So if you want your child to get some justice and make sure that that person isn't doing the same thing to other kids, and you are going to engage with a report with law enforcement, I will show up. The law enforcement officer will show up. They'll have detectives involved, and we actually have like a consent form. And I've taken over many profiles, engaged with the suspects, posing as that juvenile. And that's where the consent form comes in, because obviously I'm going to keep that conversation going to the point where we can get them to meet us, and then we've arrested them and they're not able to offend on anyone else. But there are certain rules of evidence, and for this to be successfully prosecuted, it has to be the law enforcement.
So you all caught that, right? Don't do this yourself.
Right. And that's just it. You're seeing on Instagram all these people who are running their own child predator operations for the views and the likes and the comments, and it's getting people in trouble. Like we had 2 incidents recently in the last couple of months with 2 Scottsdale groups of kids from Scottsdale. They literally were hanging out in the parking lot, and the guy, the predator, came and saw and then went to leave, and they threw a rock at his window and broke his window. Guess who the police arrested? Not the predator, because there's no evidence of this, because it wasn't done by law enforcement. Not to say he doesn't need to go to jail, but now you guys have committed criminal damage. And worse than that, the second set of kids met with the guy and said, hey, if you pay me $200, we won't call the police and tell them about this. So now we're committing extortion. So yeah, it's not okay. Stop doing it. That is absolutely not okay. And you'll find yourself in trouble.
Yes. And even to add to this, because I work with agencies too, and this stuff comes up a lot. So I just kind of wanted to bring this to your attention too, because we talked about, if you notice something at a gas station, do not follow, do not engage unless it's natural to engage with the people you think might be victims. I mean, we have stewardesses that we talk to who may engage, or if you're a waitress at a restaurant, you may engage in a normal, natural way, but do not think that you're going to follow people and investigate, and you're going to take pictures from your car, and you're going to be really sneaky about it, because these people are dangerous.
Oh yeah.
and just feel free to. What do you say about that?
Well, yeah, just like when you're on the phone with the dispatcher and you just witnessed a car accident and then it turns into a hit and run, they're going to tell you, do not follow. Just let me know which direction they went. If you've got the plate, vehicle description, if you saw the driver, if you can identify the driver, but they're going to tell you not to follow. It's the same thing. It is too dangerous, and we're not going to take on the liability of putting you in that situation. So of course, we're going to advise you not to get involved in that way. Being a good witness is just observing. That is what being a good witness is, and reporting what you're seeing. That's all, the involvement that we would need. And we don't want to be responding to a violent incident also, in addition to the report that you were making as far as the sex trafficking.
Right. So go ahead and tell everybody again, what is your website, and then the title of your book.
Yeah.
So make sure that they can get a hold of you.
Okay. Yeah. So my website is achancephorawareness.com. Again, the A is in the beginning there. And then I'm also on Instagram, A_chance_for_awareness. And I have a Pinterest and a Facebook, and I'm also on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn, I think that's where we met. My LinkedIn game is pretty strong. I have an audience of mostly law enforcement on LinkedIn. So, and I use LinkedIn all the time because I'm investigating, I'm looking at financials, and I see some charge and I don't know, and I'm part of a human trafficking investigators group, and I might post a quote or a question in the group asking, hey, does anybody know this business? Could this be related to prostitution ads? So it's and I also answer questions like that in the group, and anyone who messages me. So LinkedIn, and then yes, my book is on anywhere where you buy books, but Amazon. I have it in ebook as well as paperback, and then I'm having it translated in Spanish, as well as doing an audio in English and in Spanish. That's my goals for 2025, because I want to reach parents that may not speak English as well, because they also need to know all of these things about preventing their kids from getting involved in being trafficked. So that is my story, and I'm sticking to it. So
Thank you so much for being here with us tonight. And I'm really, it's awesome to see women who are making such a big impact.
well, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
Have an amazing, amazing holiday.
Yes, you too.
Thank you guys so much for being here with us this first week of January. And if you love this podcast and you want to support us, again, all the proceeds benefit Battle to Be, our 501c3 nonprofit that bridges the gap between our military and first responders and the communities that they serve in times of crisis. So you can go to BATTLE, the number 2, BE.org. If you want to find out more about Heidi and her offerings, again, we will put her website down below. We'll put the link to her book on Amazon so that you can find that really easily and chase her down on social media. And I will see you guys next week for another episode of Rise Up Voices from the Frontlines.